Now you can, Bob.
Okay. Good evening, comrades, and welcome to the weekly Sunday night event of Online Communist Forum, the weekly political meeting hosted by the Communist Party of Great Britain on political events over the past week. Tonight's theme and discussion predominantly, as I understand, will circle around the monarchy and what's going on in Ukraine at the moment. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Jack from the CPGB, who will open on these topics. And as usual, there'll be plenty of time for discussion at the end. Over to you, Jack.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Okay, well, I'm gonna be very quick. There's the sort of short version of this meeting, and there's the long version. You're going to get both, but I'm going to begin with the short version, and I think we've advertised it something along the lines of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Does he herald the end of the monarchy? And the short version of this meeting is, you've guessed it, no. Right. So that's over. So he definitely doesn't herald the end of the monarchy. Of course, the monarchy will come to an end, but not through some royal scandal, let alone of this sort. Okay, so what's the latest story here? It's, of course, the Epstein files, which will be a mine for journalists and researchers and historians, I would guess, for decades to come. But specifically with Prince Andrew, as I will call him. I was saying to Bob earlier that throughout our history as the Weekly Worker, we've always called them by their family name. And I'm now going to go back to their sort of royal titles. So Prince Andrew. What's the big story? Well, the big story is, of course, that in 2001, he was appointed a trade envoy. Trade envoys, by the way, it's a greasy pole of corruption that goes right down into, not just the establishment, but I'd say almost to the edges of the establishment. So, for example, Belle Rabibo, whatever her name is. Anyway, she was a trade envoy, remember? Member of the Socialist Campaign Group until for Ghana until Starmer sacked her. Obviously, what we've got with Prince Andrew is something higher up. He didn't get any money, just millions. I think it was 4.2 million in terms of expenses. It's the sort of thing you need, isn't it? When you travel around the world, you need security guards, you need 5-star hotels, you need drivers. What else? Well, we'll come to what his other needs were. But yeah, what did he do? Well, one story I heard was having either visited or he was about to visit Afghanistan, of all places. Apparently, he put CC'd on his, email straight to Jeffrey Epstein. These are the opportunities that there are in Afghanistan. Well, I'm used to them, comrades telling me that the reason why America invaded was because of pipelines, or the reason why America invaded Afghanistan is because they got cobalt or gold, or I'm sure they've got all of that there, but the reason they invaded had nothing to do with that. All I would say to you, if you fancy going to, Afghanistan to open your mine or dig your well, good luck to you. You'll need an army. And clearly Americans weren't effective in that particular respect. Either way, the scandal isn't that this was some state secret. I just think that that's a banality. The scandal is that he broke his oath, his agreement. I presume it's signed there in black and white when you become a trade envoy, that you don't give away government secrets. He signed it and he straight away sends it to his mate Jeffrey in New York or wherever Ireland he was on at the time. Now, my version of it is Why would you appoint an idiot as a trade envoy? I mean, seriously. Um, well, I don't know, but so my version of the story isn't, oh well, Andy, gave away government. Who appointed him a trade envoy? And of course, you think 2001. Ah, that's Tony Blair, isn't it? So Tony Blair apparently, acting on the advice of a Peter Mandelson, with Jack Straw as Foreign Secretary, and I think Patricia Hewitt, former left winger, as Trade Secretary or something like that. They recommended Andrew for this global role. Remember, he was retiring from the Navy. He was a hero of the Falklands War, and they wanted to give him something to do. Now, for what it's worth, and I'm sure you've read the same as I have, someone called Prince. Which prince was this? Prince Charles. He calls himself king at the moment, right? King Charles III. That's what he calls himself at the moment. He actually advised against it. And he said, don't appoint him a trade envoy. All Andrew will do, and after all, he should know, he's his brother. All Andrew will do on his trips abroad is play golf and chase women. Well, how right was he? So, yeah. And he stayed in that post for 10 years. And every report that you've got is that he was a buffoon, and an objectionable buffoon. So he's not a funny guy that you laugh with. He's someone who wants to have a joke at your expense. He wants to humiliate ordinary people around him. Now, I'm not giving anything particularly away now, but I know someone who knows someone who knows someone, sort of type thing. I know someone who knows someone who used to be one of his guards, one of his protection officers. And this is before this present scandal. And I'm told that Andrew was rude, arrogant, and extraordinarily unpleasant. And this is from someone who's meant to take a hit for Andrew. If there's a bullet aimed, this person's meant to dive in front of the bullet and take one for Andrew. Whether he would have, I don't know. One thing I can tell you is that he loathed Andrew. Now, I don't think I'm giving anything away here. The reports I've read from former servants, who has servants? Servants at Buckingham Palace tell the same story of Charles Windsor. He readily throws books at servants. I'm annoyed with you, so I'm going to throw a book, bang, at you. This is someone who can't squeeze their own tube of toothpaste. This is someone who comes in, after a day opening a road. He's had the hard job of cutting a ribbon. So he's come home exhausted from that work. He throws off his suit, and some minion is meant to bring him a replacement suit. Do they get thanked for it? I don't know. Either way, he treats them, with utter condescension. I think that's the norm with the so-called royal family. I have read on the left that Andrew's behavior, his his chasing of women, this is a sign of modern capitalist decadence. I just think anyone, this is from the Communist, the paper of the Revolutionary Communist Party. I just think that whoever wrote that has no, understanding of British history, the history of the monarchy. We've got loads of accounts of the 1920s and prostitutes. We've got loads of accounts of the 19th century, let alone if you go back to previous centuries. And what we're talking about here is, of course, entitled males not only having sex with who you'd expect them, and they would have expected to have sex with people like servants, but fellow members of the aristocracy. And that is what would make the news. That is what would be objectionable. I mean, there's a famous passage in the Communist Manifesto about capitalist owners having sex with their female employees. And I think obviously Marx, with extreme irony, says that, well, that's the norm. What is objectionable is when they have sex with the wives and daughters of fellow capitalists. That's what's objectionable. So I do think that the commodification of women is as old as class society. This isn't a modern phenomenon that begins with Epstein or Andrew. This is the nature of class society. This is how men at the top of society behave to women of their own class, let alone of the lower classes. Okay. Right. Getting me laughing. The establishment parties, Liberal Democrats, Tories, Labour Party, they're all getting together to remove Andrew from the line of succession, because having got rid of his royal title, they're saying, well, he's still eighth in line. And this is outrageous. He could become king. Imagine if there was a plane crash or something like that, and there you are, he's king. Well, this is outrageous, isn't it? So we've got to remove him from being king. This is clearly gesture politics. This is clearly damage control. I'd simply say this, that the coverage I'm reading at the moment of Andrew, given all I've just said, strikes me as here you are, how the mighty have fallen. Because here was someone that the popular press, the serious press, the establishment, the mainstream media built up, and his picadillos, the Randy Andy aspect, it was a sort of a source of fun. Well, that's what princes get up to. This is copy, to be sold by the Sun, the Daily Mail, the Mirror, for example. Now, if you look at how that's turned, what we get is if he has sex with anyone, this becomes some sort of criminal act. So last week, wasn't it, a 26-year-old Russian who'd been recommended to him by Epstein? I don't know if any money changed hands. I don't know what that was all about. But we get this sort of flip of the popular press into celebrating royalty to condemning one particular individual. It's called demonization. It's a similar treatment that's being meted out to Mandelson. We've never had any time for Mandelson, but look at the mainstream press. Look at how they empowered Mandelson and the New Labour project. Look how they celebrated when he was actually appointed by Starmer as ambassador to Washington. This was a great move. The previous ambassador wasn't to Trump's liking, so we put in Mandelson. Who objected? Very, very few. Okay, I'd also simply add this, that if you look at why women have been having sex with Andrew, it might have just been a cash exchange, but there's also the possibility, I think, that here you are, here's someone who's rich and famous and calls himself Prince. It to me has something similar to groupies, with Mick Jagger, pop stars of the 1960s and 70s. And so, yeah, the role of the press in building these people up and making them sort of desirable is clearly an important aspect of the story. Okay, I wanted to turn now really to the treatment, of this story by the left press. Now, it's too early to find out much, but you can guarantee what they're going to be saying, can't you? I've already referred to the Communist, that this is this is an example of decadence. You've got Starmer, but you've got Epstein, and you've got Prince Andrew. I would call these people, how should you put it, platonic Republicans or occasional Republicans. I think that's a fair description, because what you get is they're Republican when you have a scandal. They're Republican when you get a royal marriage. They're Republican when you get a royal centenary. And usually what it's done on is on the premise that the royals cost us so much money. Look at how much money, Andrew has been getting. Look how much it costs to keep up Buckingham Palace. And you get that combined, that penny sort of approach to it. You get that combined with the idea that this is a feudal relic, that it's some sort of carryover from ancient times. Well, that isn't our approach. Of course, it's a carryover from feudal times. There's no doubt about it. We've all been to school. We've all been taught 1066 and all of that. Some of us might have even been talked about Saxons and Alfred and the cakes and all the rest of it. So there's no doubt that monarchy goes way back. Of course, it's not a unbroken line. But the point we would make, and the point we've consistently made, is that this isn't just about pomp and circumstance. This isn't just about what did Erskine May called it, the dignified part of the Constitution. Royalty, the monarchy, is embedded in the British Constitution. And just to illustrate the point, think back to the time of Corbyn, when some on the left were under the delusion that if Corbyn led the Labour Party into a general election, 2017, 2019, and the Labour Party romped home with a clear majority, that meant that Corbyn would become Prime Minister. And we were just going, are you kidding? Of course he wouldn't, unless there was a revolutionary situation and they put in Corbyn in the same way that the Russian establishment put in, Kerensky as first a minister in the provisional government. Remember, the provisional government was elected by the old Duma, the Tsar's Duma. So they put in Kerensky as their left face. He becomes the leader of the provisional government. Wasn't elected by anything other than a small circle. He was put in there precisely to stop revolution. So it's possible that Corbyn could have been called to the palace, but under the circumstances we were living in then, it was impossible. Why? Because he couldn't command a parliamentary majority. And even if he could, the establishment would use the monarchy as a line of defense against any sort of insurgency. But I don't really think there was any chance of it. And I've always remember raising it with comrades on the left. And I said, they're saying Corbyn, he can win an election. And I said, well, I said what I've just said. And they always turn around, not once, twice, 3 times or 6 times, but repeatedly I got this. Well, if that happened, there'll be a revolution. With genuine indignation, I was told this. And I just turned around and said, well, with whose army are you going to carry out this revolution of yours in defense of Corbyn? How many regiments have you got? How's the Labour Party organised in the army, the Air Force? Have we got a workers' militia ready? You raise the question and you expose the illusion. But this was the left. This was the left of the Labour Party, but also beyond. And I also then want to deal with, raising the question of the monarchy. Note, a little bit to do with us. I wouldn't claim it's, entirely us, but I think the intellectual idea comes from the CPGB. Notice the platform of the grassroots left in the current Y Party elections. I can't give it to you verbatim, but it has abolish NATO, we'll withdraw from NATO, abolish the monarchy. All right, that is in there. Who raises that consistently as a slogan? We do. And it's been taken in there. And good, it's great, for example, that the SWP is part of the grassroots left, and it's supporting that slate. 3 cheers for the SWP. But when the SWP had influence, right, for example, in Respect, I remember one of our comrades at the founding conference of Respect moving an amendment that we should change the name of Respect. And so that the R word in Respect stood, because all the letters of Respect stood for something, that we should have the R word as Republic. We are Republican. You know, you'd thought, well, that's quite a good idea because, you know, whatever. The SWP sent speakers up denouncing us because that would put off, quote unquote, and I can point you to the editions of the Weekly. That would put off SWP speakers. That would put off monarchists. Well, yes, I suspect being a Republican would put off monarchists. We also put forward to the SWP, right, that we should stand for a woman's right to have an abortion. They voted that down. We also put forward open borders. They voted that down. All right. I read in Anti-Capitalist Resistance, one of their writers is commenting on broad formations and how you shouldn't push things too far. They're actually arguing today, in the light of Andrew Windsor Mountbatten, or whatever he calls himself, Prince Andrew, that they're right in not putting forward republicanism, because this puts people off. This is too much for a broad front. So they're thinking of the Corbyn movement. I don't know whether they're thinking of your party, because in your party, the left, the grassroots slate, that explicitly stands for republicanism, and Jeremy Corbyn's the many, just like his general election manifestos, both 2019 and 2017, kept their mouth shut on this question. And I think that's a disgraceful position for any socialist or Democrat to actually stand on. I mean, how can you be a Democrat and go with monarchy? Now, it's true that if you look at monarchy, there's a whole number of different ways to come, about who's going to be the sovereign. So it should be emphasized when we talk about republicanism, we don't just mean the absence of someone who wears a funny hat and people call them Your Majesty and bow and scrape. What we mean by republicanism is democracy, is tearing down individual power, lowering power to the maximum downwards. So there's a great European Union word, at least that's where I discovered it from, subsidiarity. Have power down to the local level, not regional level, not counties, but take it down as far as you can go. So why not self-administration on a borough level for issues that are relevant to boroughs? Why not have blocks of flats in London and other towns that have committees? That's what we mean by democracy. Same in workplaces. So we want power radically distributed downwards. And that means no monarchs, but it also means no monarchical presidents. And that's an absolutely vital point. So no French president who has the power to appoint a prime minister from the National Assembly. No American president. Notice that there's going to be the third No Kings demonstration in the United States. The United States has not had a king ever, except they've had a monarchical president. Remember, there was an idea of crowning George Washington, and George Washington apparently said, no, no, no. But they did elect someone who had monarchical powers, and we object to that. We don't mind, a Speaker of the House of Commons or something along those lines, someone who goes and, cuts ribbons and represents, some sort of diplomatic role, but no power, of a monarchical sort. So what we mean by republicanism isn't some tidying up of the constitution and getting rid of so-called feudal relics. It's about radical democracy. It's about what we call extreme democracy. So yeah, the left fails when it comes to all of that. Okay, so I've already answered, will this bring down the monarchy? Of course not. You have to have an agency of change. And we certainly are committed to, bringing down the monarchy. What you actually have, believe it or not, in anti-capitalist resistance is the idea of keeping the monarchy. They want to keep the monarchy, but they just want to take away some powers. I mean, okay, so I don't know what it's like in Cambodia. Anyone visited Cambodia, which was the regime is in Cambodia now, if you go to Phnom Penh? This is the regime that the Vietnamese, remember, put into power. They overthrow Pol Pot. You get loads of bloody pictures of the king still. So I don't know what particular, it's an official communist regime with a king. I don't know what the socialist, what they used to be called socialist resistance, ACR, anti-capitalist, that seems to be what they have in mind. So we still have, I presume, coronations, comrades, and calling people, your majesty. And no, get rid of all of that. And, my model, for all these people, and I'm not saying that this is truly gospel, but if you want an example of, at least my approach to the monarchy, look at what's the film called? I can't remember the name. Toby will know who the film director was. Anyway, famous Italian film director, The Last Emperor. And this is about the last emperor of China, right? Someone who couldn't tie their own shoelaces, a bit like Charles Windsor, right? What did they do? He ended up as the gardener in central Beijing, right? So I think that would be a fitting role for Charles Windsor. Put him in, the gardens of Buckingham Palace, of course, open to the public, and you'll see him deadheading the roses. What exactly role you'd give to Prince Andrew or Citizen Windsor, as we would call him, I don't know. But I'm sure you can think of something that's fitting to his extraordinarily limited talents. And again, okay, so who's an agency for a republic? The campaigning body, the Republic? Don't think so. But I tell you that the Green Party outdoes the left, not just the Labour Party. I looked up their last manifesto. This is before Zach Polanski. There you are. Abolish the monarchy, get rid of the whole lot of it. And I say, doesn't mean I'm going to vote Green, but I say 3 cheers for the Greens. You're better than the SWP. You're better than anti-capitalist resistance. You're better than most of the left, which just rely on the working class carrying out strikes and us going on the latest demonstration. And of course, what you also get at the moment with all these people is a trailing of the Greens. The Greens are popular at the moment. So what we do is tail them in the hope of gaining recruits. Well, the fact of the matter is, when it comes to democracy, the Greens are better than the left. And certainly when it comes, for example, to Keir Starmer, I was reading Socialist Worker this week, condemning Keir Starmer's new defense budget, saying it's a waste of money, shouldn't be using money on arms when we should be using it for welfare, building houses. Well, I would actually say, so you don't defend the country, don't you? It's interesting. We wouldn't vote a penny, we wouldn't vote a man to defend this system. But it doesn't mean we don't have our own defense policy. So we would put forward, for example, a popular militia. Isn't it interesting that today's left, if we raise that question and say, well, what we want isn't millions of pounds spent on, I don't know, F-35s, but what we want is a popular militia, the left laughs at that. They say this is ridiculous. Well, under Natalie Bennett, let alone Zach Goldsmith, that is what the Green Party stood for, right? So anyway, I'll move on. And so coming to Ukraine, this is the 4th anniversary. I have to say that I've been surprised by the lack of coverage of Ukraine. If you think back a few years ago when the war began, we had music for Ukraine, we had theatre for Ukraine, we had wall-to-wall broadcasting for Ukraine. The press was full of it. Sadiq Khan led a mass demonstration in solidarity, which included sections of the left. Very quiet. I think today you had Boris Johnson, who's still popular, at least in Ukraine, broadcasting on the BBC, saying that unarmed British troops should go to Afghanistan. Well, what is the bloody use of that? That's posturing Boris. I don't know whether this is about the rehabilitation of Boris, but isn't it interesting that you get sections of the left that cannot raise the popular militia slogan in Britain, but are raising the question of arm Ukraine. And I think that what's interesting is that sections of this left, the pro-imperialist left, they're quite right when they say that the West, and specifically the United States, has held back arming Ukraine with the most advanced, the most deadly weaponry, that Ukraine has been set up to fight a war of attrition against Russia, not actually set up to fight a war where it wins back every inch of territory. It sends every Russian back over the border. And I'm talking about Russian troops, remember, not Russian people. Either way, it's been quiet. Why? Well, of course, the answer is pretty obvious. We've seen a shift between Joe Biden, which was turning Ukraine into a crusade, calling for the overthrow of the murderer Vladimir Putin, galvanizing the West to defend Ukraine. We've seen a break with Trump. That doesn't mean that we're dealing with something utterly different. In my view, it's the same thing, but carried out in a different way. What Trump has made clear, at least at the moment, is he's quite content for European powers, and we can bolt on, I suppose, Japan, Canada to that. He's quite content for these countries to pay for American arms that go to Ukraine. Meanwhile, there we are. We have Geneva, and we have negotiations between Ukraine, the United States, and Russia, of where the United States is basically twisting the arm of Zelensky and saying, you must accept that Russia keeps the 20% that it's gained of Ukrainian territory. They must have Sebastopol back as a recognized port where they can operate their fleet into the Mediterranean. From the rest of the Donbass oblasts will have some sort of free trade status. Zelensky is most reluctant here. You can understand why. They've got a constitution that says Ukraine is indivisible. He's also got the vultures of his opponents and potential presidential rivals circling. Notice the ambassador to London. Notice the mayor of Kiev. Nonetheless, you ask the question, it's a rhetorical question, why doesn't Vladimir Putin just grab this deal if it is a sellout, as much of as liberal opinion insists that it is? Well, I can give the game away. It's called 100,000 NATO troops on the border of the new Russia. That's what it's about. It's about precisely a heavily armed, at European expenses, Ukraine, under the soft underbelly of the Russian Federation. Now, in my own opinion, I don't. It's not because I think this will happen. It's just the only way I can work it out. I think what Trump, because I don't think he's stupid. I don't think the people around him are all stupid. I don't think, you know, the staff at the State Department and all the rest of it and the CIA and the whole apparatus are stupid. I think what's going on in Geneva is an attempt to, you know, what's the word, lever Russia away from its alliance with China. If I was Russia, and I'm sure they've got good advisors as well, I wouldn't go for it either. I wouldn't bank on Trump not doing the dirty as they did with Yeltsin. You know, Yeltsin was made, you know, Russia under Yeltsin was made part of the G8, and the Russian economy was crashed. You know, the Soviet Union fell apart, and living standards just went, I think, at an unprecedented level downwards throughout the former Soviet Union. So I'm very skeptical about that, but I think that's the sort of thing that is dominating American plans, and you can see why Russia, Putin, blah blah, would be very skeptical about that. I'd also just emphasize, in closing on that, what we've attempted to do from the beginning, and that is to put the Russia-Ukraine conflict into the bigger picture of NATO expansion, about a relatively declining hegemonic power, the United States, versus a rising power of China. I don't think China is just about to overtake the United States as a potential global hegemon. I think that's a long time coming. You know, if Britain could stop Germany, the United States can stop China. Either way, I think that it has to be in that picture that we understand what is going on in Ukraine. Therefore, those sections of the left that simply look at Ukraine and say, well, there's little Ukraine, you know, 30, 40 million population. There's Russia, 150 million people. There's Putin, the great murdering bully, poor heroic Zelensky. To me, it reminds me of the language of World War I and poor little Belgium, brave, plucky Serbia. No, we need the bigger picture, and we need the bigger picture to understand what's going on. And on that basis, of course, we sympathize with ordinary Ukrainian people who are suffering, and the troops on the front line. It's horrible, it's foul. Nevertheless, from our point of view, we do not stand, you know, with Ukraine against Russia. From our angle, it's revolutionary defeatism. We're in favor of the defeat of our own side, but that does not mean victory for the Russian side. Myself, I don't think Russia is an imperialist power. I don't have to convince myself, you know, according to some orthodoxy, if it's imperialist, then I can oppose it. I can oppose Putin and the FSB regime in Moscow, at the same time opposing the corrupt Zelensky regime in Kiev as being a puppet of, you know, NATO, the West, the United States. It's still a puppet of the United States, in spite of, you know, Trump and his attempted deal with Putin. Okay, talking about Trump, people are determined to fuck my articles up. In this week, I've got a 4th anniversary article on the war, and I talk about the Trump regime, and I talk upon it along the lines of, you know, Trump's got a majority in Congress. He's the president. That gives him enormous powers. And he's also got, quote unquote, an enabling Supreme Court. Well, I wouldn't write that today, would I? I'd have to come out, you know, I'd have to qualify that, because clearly the Supreme Court, by a judgment of 6-3, has really put a spanner in Trump's program. The whole tariff program of reordering the world to the benefit of the United States. Clearly, the Supreme Court has damaged that. What does Trump describe it as? A ridiculous judgment, poorly written, and extraordinarily anti-American. Okay. We know that what he did, how he's responded, he's had to do it across the board. So first of all, we get, well, I'm going to slap 10% tariffs on everybody. In the same day, he ups that to 15%. It shows you what I can do. Apparently, this is under 1974 legislation. This would be Nixon legislation. I don't know why. If someone does know why, tell me. This lasts for 5 months. I don't know if it's renewable after 5 months, whether he has to go to Congress. I just don't know. Either way, that's what we've got, right? So I don't know what he's going to do about that. Is he going to go to Congress as it exists? If he does that, good chance of him not getting this legislation through. There's enough wobbly Republicans, let alone the Democrats. What's he going to do about the midterms? I mean, the danger is at the moment, you look at opinion polls, Trump will be looking at opinion polls and this damn Supreme Court judgment. Will he be tempted to do something extraordinary? I mean, I don't know, but this is a president. Remember, last time around when he lost, he did lose that presidential election. What did he do? He didn't just sulk. He actually attempted a coup, a self-coup. Pence was meant to turn around and say, I am not continuing with the count. What the CIA, what the FBI, what the army were meant to do, they were meant to go along with this. Were they going to do it? I don't think so. But this is the president that told his mob of Proud Boys and Boogaloos, march up the road. And they marched up the road with, gallows. They marched up the road with the intention of storming the Capitol. They broke in to the Capitol. So what's he going to do midterm? Well, we've heard stuff about nationalizing these elections. That means not having things run from a state level. We've also heard talk of these elections being cancelled. I mean, I don't know, but what we have, I think, at least with this individual president, is that it's no longer business as usual. We know that in America, you have a highly fought presidential election, you have highly fought elections at all levels, and then they basically do what players do, in football. They shake hands, they know they could be on the other side, whatever, they know it's a game. What we have is someone who's different with Trump. What we have is different circumstances with Trump. Now, whether that's a permanent question or a temporary aberration, we wait and see. My own guess, for what it's not worth anything much, is I think this does represent a change in American politics. That's my guess. The fact that we did have this attempted self-coup tells me that we're into something else. And if it isn't Trump, maybe it will be JD Vance, maybe it will be Rubio. I obviously don't know, but we should be at least looking at these possibilities. Okay. A number of things are, of course, exempt. Metals, minerals, pharma are exempt from these tariffs. But I just wanted to add a couple of things. And that is, first of all, if you take mainstream liberal opinion, when it looked at Freedom Day, remember the list of countries with tariffs all neatly. I mean, some of them were just ridiculous. I mean, some of them I think there was one journalist that pointed out that one of the countries that Trump listed for whatever the hell the tariff didn't even exist. It must have been a territory of someone. Either way, the idea that this was madness, this was stupidity, I just don't buy. Note as far as I understand it, only one country didn't blink when it came to Trump's tariffs, and that country was China. China basically said, well, come on then, let's have a trade war. Britain, Canada, France, Japan, South Korea, everyone else bowed to Trump, right? And that is what we need to understand about this tariff war. This wasn't madness. This is about the United States extracting tribute from the rest of the world. And to prove it, what we have now is the big reveal that in the course of extracting that tribute, and okay, it's extracted off American companies, American consumers, but this is them not buying from abroad or paying extra taxes from abroad, right? Either way, the United States has collected so far off this is the sort of visible figure, 130 billion, which isn't very much. Looking at the US GDP, I haven't got a clue, offhand how many trillions the US GDP is. But what I do know is its arms budget, its defense budget is $1 trillion, which will give you an idea that this isn't big money. But what is going on, as I said, is tribute. Okay, so I think that's. Oh yeah, we have a tsunami of legal cases. I think this will just be ground into the court system in the United States, which is extraordinarily slow, full of appeals and other possibilities. Okay, so we've got about a quarter of an hour. Will Trump attack Iran? Going from one bloody I don't know to another. I don't know. It's as simple as that. I could look at my phone in 5 minutes' time, and there you are. The bombs are exploding, over Tehran, and people are dying. That's quite conceivable. But my version of it is, I doubt it. That's just my take on it. My take on it is this is negotiating tactics. And that's why, again, I just come back to my article this week. That's why I think it's important, at least try to understand Trump, the man. Look at the films, look at, Wolf, look at his The Art of the Deal. That's what's going on in Geneva. That's what's going on with these 2 aircraft carriers. That's got what's going on with these planes being directed towards the Middle East. This is threat. This is mafia type business dealing. If you want to keep both your legs, do a deal. This is the message to the Ayatollahs. Now, will this involve regime change? Again, I haven't got a clue, but will it involve the equivalent of what happened in Venezuela? It's not impossible. Not impossible that the United States is in contact, for example, with reformist leaders or with elements, or leading elements perhaps, of the Revolutionary Guard. Maybe, the supreme leader dies of a heart attack, real or imagined. I mean, again, I just don't know any of this, but I wouldn't have, for example, have predicted what happened in Caracas. So again, I'm just being radically, I don't know-ish. But I think that what I wanted to finish with on terms of that is, I think, Venezuela, what's going on in Cuba, and I'll touch upon that very briefly. What's going on in Iran at the moment illustrates the thesis that we've been putting forward, is there's still one hegemon in the world. China is not going to come to the rescue of Iran, right? Nor is Russia. It didn't come to the rescue of Venezuela. It didn't come to the rescue of Cuba. It's not going to come to the rescue of Cuba, right? That illustrates the power of the United States. So all this talk about a multi-centered world, a plurality of power. Of course, there's different powers. Of course there is. But the fact of the matter is that China can't take back Taiwan, which is legally recognized as part of China. The government in Taipei used to claim to be ruling the whole of China, or legally the legitimate government of the whole of China. It can't actually take full control of the sea next to its land. let alone intervening in the Caribbean or the Gulf, for example. Okay, so we're told. I mean, again, I'll finish with this. New York Times. I mean, sometimes in these circumstances, elements of the bourgeois press, either out of naivety or cynicism, and I don't know which, run stories of saying how powerful the other side is, how dangerous it is. I'm reminded of Saddam Hussein, you know, NASA in 1956. I wasn't quite old enough, but I have read and watched the old films and all the rest of it. These people are Adolf Hitler #2 and all the rest of it. Real dangerous, you know. And when the war starts, collapse like a pack of cards. Well, I read the New York Times. Apparently, Iran has an extensive military capabilities. And I had to say, I laughed out loud. Last time I looked at Iran's extensive military capabilities, the Air Force consisted of things like, if anyone knows these planes, F-4s. Remember the Vietnam War? They were cutting edge technology just about then. Nowadays, they are flying antiques. You know, it's equivalent of World War II with biplanes, right? You really need to get your head. That is what the New York Times is saying is potent military capabilities. Its navy consists of patrol boats. It hasn't got an aircraft carrier, right? It's got missiles, yes. And you look at it, draws a map and it says, well, this is where it could hit. So what? So you can hit, I don't know, Baghdad. You could hit an American base in Arabia, Saudi Arabia. Well, so what? Meanwhile, the United States has the capability of carrying out shock and awe, of just wiping out Iran's missile arsenal. I mean, that's the reality, actually, of the disparity of military power. The problem is, of course, that what we're dealing with here, and that's why I'm extraordinarily skeptical, that would be easy for the United States. That can just be done within hours. Whole of, Iran's military threat is just taken out. They conducted an air war over 12 days with no loss, remember. Okay, the problem is regime change. Unless you have boots on the ground, how are you going to carry out regime change? And my version of it is, I could be wrong. What do you do? I mean, okay, so they knock out 1,500 missiles. They destroy your air force on the ground. They knock out some patrol boats. And what are you meant to do as the supreme leader? Say, oh, I'm really so afraid I'm going to surrender and let the Shah come back in and they will shoot me. Or maybe I can go off and live in Iraq next door or something. Oh, come on. What we've got is a regime that is supported by 20% of the population, that is hated by the 80%. That regime change will carry. They're not going to voluntarily cede power. So you might get, some sort of internal coup. And I don't know what happened in Venezuela, but, so I'm just very skeptical. And I'm not going to push myself any further. Anyway, last few minutes, Bob. Cuba, why did Cuba survive? Why did it have such good social services? Why was life expectancy in Cuba above the United States? For God's sake, a condemnation of American health service, but also something that shows you what you can do, even in a poor Caribbean country. Well, the answer is quite straightforward. Of course, there was local effort, ingenuity, pride in the revolution, and all the rest of it. But it was called the USSR, and then it was called Venezuela. That's the explanation. The United States has imposed an embargo, electricity cuts, no tourist flights. Why? Not because they're banning tourists, but because there's no oil to fly them out of Cuba. Cuba has the highest exodus rate, I think, last time I looked it up, in the world, bar Ukraine. Remember, women and children, old men went to Western Europe. So its drop in population has been enormous, but only only, not quite matching it is Cuba. And the government took the decision, we can't keep people in because it risks a social explosion. Let them go. And of course, what happens now is ordinary Cubans have a real difficulty in finding any country that would accept them. So you have extraordinary routes of people going to Kazakhstan or something like that will accept some Cuban doctor, and then you go make your way to the United States, or I don't know where in the Spain would be a good place to go to, for example. So I'm sure there are loads of, Bob, you can tell me if I'm wrong, that there are loads of Cubans in Spain. I know there are a load of Latin Americans, from American wrecking jobs, not least from Venezuela, for example. Okay. And yet we have still people looking at Cuba as some sort of model. It's admirable. The health service was admirable. There's no doubt about that. As I said, life expectancy is a great test of a society. But you still have the idea on the left is the answer is a national socialism, and that we make ourselves independent. Well, Cuba was never independent. I try to make that argument. It was dependent on the Soviet Union. It was dependent on Venezuela. When that's taken away, it's thrown into absolute poverty. And so we have this vote in Scotland of your party, 60-40 majority percentage, to declare your party separate and to go for independence. Imagine if that was a socialist, in inverted commas, independence. What England or Britain or whatever the hell it would be called would do to a socialist Scotland or the United States. They would be in absolute poverty. People will be flowing out of Scotland, going south, going over to Ireland, going anywhere they can to escape this paradise. So what's the left about? According to the SWP, it's all about weakening British imperialism. What weakens British imperialism, breakaway Scotland would, is good for the working class. This is rubbish. We, on the other hand, say unity is strength. We want to unite with the European working class. We want to form a joint party with the European working class. We want to be part of an international, right, that organizes at the highest level, coordinates at the highest level. A Communist Party of the European Union, for example, standing joint candidates, having joint schools, having press bureaus, having people move back and forth, learning each other's politics, learning each other's culture. That's our future, not a breakaway Scotland where comrades think that they're so superior to those English who deal with things like slates and are riven with factions. Please. Okay, last 2 minutes, Bob, with your indulgence. Garston and Denton, according to our intrepid John Smithy, the letter writer from, Finland, good old John Smithy. We apparently are calling for a vote for the Labour Party in order to beat the Greens. Not true. Read the article. We said that if you take Corbyn's approach, if you take Sultana's approach, the key thing is to beat reform. Given the opinion poll and poll of polls, which I quoted, the logical thing to do is vote Labour. That's all I said. What I did then go on to say is that if you are going to, have any vote, at least you've got to justify it programmatically. And we would justify voting Labour in Gorton and Denton, not on the basis of who's best placed to beat reform, but no, on the basis that we have a programme of transforming the Labour Party. We still have that approach. Comrade raises up, what's his name? Hugo Wills, W-I-L-S, comrade in the Communist League. We have dealt with that organisation. This is an organisation, already dealt with the politics of it, that's for the defence of Ukraine, right? A pro-imperialist, social imperialist organisation. This is an organisation, I don't know about it, but it's American mothership, pro-Israel, pro the witch hunt in the Labour Party. The Labour Party, when you were a member, when I was a member, when Jeremy Corbyn was leading the Labour, full of anti-Semites. That is the Communist League. And so we say, well, no, the word communist is there, but no thank you, comrades. we're not going to vote Communist League. And we put forward the reasons why, which we have. And we're saying vote Labour. It's shit, it stinks. And I'll finish with this, no, penultimately one, finish with this one. I was reading in Socialist Worker, quote unquote, this is Comrade Frankie Marden. The Labour Party's previous to Blair and all that, the Labour Party's previous role of representing trade unions and reflecting working class aspirations was too narrow, according to Peter Mandelson and Tony Blair. Excuse me using an Anglo-Saxon, Comrade Frankie, but bollocks. Look at the first Labour government of McDonnell. Look at the second Labour government. Did that reflect trade union interests when they were cutting the dole? Did joining the coalition government in World War I reflect working class interests and aspirations? No. You really don't know the history of the Labour Party if you write such rubbish. You know, Blair represented a new phase. He didn't represent actually a qualitative change. He might have wanted to deliver a qualitative change. He didn't. Hence, you ended up with Corbyn temporarily. Last point, and it will be the last one, Bob, and that's our comrade in the Spartacist League, Vincent David, and hope you're here, Spartacist comrades. And that is, he's arguing in defense of their approach in Australia, urging students to go into industry and become blue collar, and also, is it pink collar workers, which is something new on most British people. But anyway, get in there and be part of the proletariat. And the comrade isn't that stupid. He doesn't actually defend that position. He just says, oh, well, you know, students nowadays can't get a job or become a plumber. Okay, become a plumber. But what you wouldn't demand a quota under those circumstances, would you? He wants a 50% quota of where you become blue collar workers. And he says this is part of his defense. Every single communist party that grew, this is paraphrasing, by the way, from a sect to a national force did so by organizing workers and leading decisive sections of the proletariat in struggle. He's talking about something completely different. And I pose this, CPGB, you could make the argument that it went from being a sect, or maybe even 3 sects, or whatever you want. But okay, you know, the merger, 1920, Communist Party, few thousand members. And I asked Comrade Vincent David, it's a rhetorical question, did the comrades send their student comrades from Oxford and Cambridge and Durham into the mines? Did they send them into the steelworks of Sheffield? Did they send them onto the buses in London? And the answer is no, of course they didn't, because that would have been stupid. And that is what you got with the Spartacist League. Now, either the comrades are cynical when they propose this in Australia, or they've so internalized this idea that they've made themselves stupid. I don't know. So it's either cynicism or it's stupidity, or maybe they've managed to combine the both. It's quite conceivable that it's actually both. I'll finish with that, Bob. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. Comrades, floor's open now. We got up for an hour or for discussion. If you want to speak, raise your hand, please. And some of you may need to be made into panelists in order to join in the discussion. Just by the way, on Cubans in Spain, John, yeah, a lot are in Madrid, but many are actually in the Canary Islands as well. The last time I looked. Just a quick point before people put their hands up on the monarchy. I've been, it's hard to miss, isn't it, over the last week, what's been going on with the British monarchy. And I do think the monarchy itself must be worried to a certain extent. I mean, the idea, some of the press are saying, well, you know, the British monarchy must have known about Andrew's reputation previously, and you know, you only got to look at the press for Elizabeth II. Didn't she bail him out of one of his court cases against what was the
12
name?
million quid they funded.
Yeah, and you know, so that, you know, about 12 million, and so did Prince Charles to the tune of 1.5 million. So I mean, that clearly suggests to me that the monarchy were putting in money to do an out-of-court settlement, not to embarrass themselves anymore, because God knows what an out-of-court settlement would reveal. Another thing is, it seems to me that when people talk about the monarchy and getting rid of it, what they're actually saying these days is reforming it rather than getting rid of it. I mean, poll after poll, particularly with younger people within society, they're saying they don't like the monarchy, but there's no real alternative, no real ideological idea of what is to replace the monarchy. And until you have, as you said, John, the agency to get rid of it, I think you're going to have the establishment, and I think you're going to have the state shaping what the monarchy can be turned into and rebranded these days. So I'd like to say that until there's a vehicle and strong enough to abolish it, I think you're just going to get a rebranding of it in due course. Any speakers, comrades? Jim Nelson.
Yeah, thank you. Just briefly on the monarchy again. Of course, the thing about the monarchy is that it's the last power, isn't it? Everybody has to swear allegiance: Army, Navy, Air Force, police, MPs. If anything goes wrong for the ruling class, then the monarchy can, legally anyway, just say, right, this is what's going to happen. I assume the judiciary are in there as well, Mike. This is what's going to happen. Of course, then you might have civil war already, or that might get it going, or whatever. But it isn't only a question of cutting ribbons and walking down the road and sitting on a horse and stuff like that. And of course, the idea of having an elected president instead, we could end up with Nigel Farage in charge. That'd be good, wouldn't it? That's it. Thank you.
John Ryan, I believe your hand went up and you wanted to speak. Right, John. No, can't see you, John. I'll keep you in mind. We've got Anne. Anne, can you come in now, please?
Okay, thanks, Bob. Okay, so basically, I want to make 2 points. Firstly, in relation to the behavior of the monarchy, I understand that the name that the staff used for Prince Andrew was Cunt. That was his nickname.